help? Well, my next guest believes that people like me are actually redundant because she says that women have been conned into believing that sex with men is actually enjoyable. Will you welcome, please, Sheila Jeffries. Sheila, did I represent you correctly?
I'm not sure you represented quite how complex it is, actually.
Yes, it is, I must say, in your book, Anticlimax, it is... I knew they would laugh at that.
It was supposed to be a funny title.
A funny title. It is a very academic and learned work with lots of cross-references, so it is a complex argument. Is it true that women should not be enjoying sex with men?
Well, the argument of the book is that the sexual revolution of the 1960s that I lived through, and I don't know how it was happening in Ireland, but I imagine other people did too, was not something that was in the interests of women, because the whole way it's been written about by historians is that it was actually about the liberation of women, because it liberated women into doing more sex, specifically into doing more sexual intercourse, more and different sexual practices. And what I do in the book is look at the way that sexologists, the sexperts, have actually constructed sexuality in order, as I see it, to keep women in subordination and men as the ruling class.
You've said that in spite of the efforts of sexologists over the past 100 years to persuade women that sex with men is enjoyable, that there are perhaps even a majority of them out there who really don't particularly fancy it.
Well, women have been the problem of sexology for the last 100 years. In the 1920s, in the 19th century, a lot of women, men didn't think women should have to enjoy sex. They didn't consider that it was right for women to be enjoying sex. When they changed their minds, and I think they changed their minds at the end of the 19th century because there was feminism and because women appeared to be revolting, and men felt that one of the ways of keeping women down was to get them to engage in sexual intercourse and enjoy it. For instance, in the 1920s, one of the sexologists said, "To be roused by a man means acknowledging oneself as conquered," which I think is a quote which says a lot, in fact. Suddenly there was an enormous energy put into trying to get women to engage in sexual intercourse and enjoy sexual intercourse. In the 20s, they couldn't work out whether maybe 40% of women were frigid, as they put it, or maybe even 100%. So they had a huge problem on their hands. We are led to believe that sexual intercourse is natural. But, of course, for the last hundreds of years, sexologists have been desperately trying to construct a practice which clearly appears to be extremely difficult for men and for women.
But men and women are built in a complementary fashion, and reproductively that would appear to be so. So isn't there always a fundamental logic in reproduction, the survival of the species? And since we're built that way, it seems right that men should be with women and women should be with men, and not women with women, as you would propose.
Well, I don't think it's very useful to use examples from animals, in fact. At the end of the 19th century, feminists actually pointed out that female animals did not have to engage in sex all the time in the way that female human beings do. So animal examples aren't a terribly good idea. Sex for animals tends to be cyclical, for instance. So I don't think going back to what animals do or what is natural is useful. Human beings have created their world and created the way they behave in it.
I've always heard the argument the opposite way around, though. It's that females in the human species can enjoy sex all the time, whereas the poor old animals, it's only when they're in season or in heat or whatever that they can enjoy it.
Well, the argument
so you've
of the
turned
book,
that one on its head.
The argument of the book is not an argument that is anti-sex. What I say in the book is that sex under male supremacy in a society in which men have control has been used as a way of controlling women, and that sex has been constructed to be female submission and male dominance, and that women have been encouraged to enjoy sexual intercourse because it was believed that it would subordinate them. But I do say in the book that it should be possible to create the eroticizing of equality, which is a very strange idea under male supremacy, because people think, how can equality be sexy? Because actually only dominance and submission has been accepted as and constructed to be sexy in this society. If you talk about eroticizing equality, then people think you must be anti-sex because they cannot imagine that.
When did it start, Sheila? Has it 15th century, 18th century, 19th century? This portrayal as dominance and submission as the way.
Well, I think under male supremacy you will find that sex is about dominance and submission. But what I've been looking at in my work is the way that this has been created into science. The sexologists for the last 100 years have been saying it is this way because of science. Before that we might have been taught that it was this way because the church said so. For the last 100 years we've had science, that is doctors and so on.
Can I interject something? I don't think this is just limited to sex. I think women are much more submissive, and I see this in practice in dealing with women, getting them to be assertive. But all you have to do is teach women to say no. And that would solve all these problems.
I think that you're ignoring the politics of the situation. Women are not in a position to say no. 14% of women, according to studies, have actually experienced sex with their husbands as a threat of force or actual force.
Right,
more than a third of men actually hit their wives on a fairly regular basis.
I agree with
it
you.
would
And
appear.
you get cancer, and your husband comes home and is about to hit you, and you say, "You touch me again, and I'm calling the police." And he says, "Why are you doing that? You're embarrassing me in front of the neighbors. You've never done this before." And the lady answered, "I have cancer now. I don't accept your behavior anymore." And that's what I'd say to every woman. Don't accept that behavior.
It's not an individual problem. I think you have no understanding of the politics of the situation.
I
Once
think
a woman is
that
being
is
battered,
untrue.
she is actually being tortured in her home. It actually weakens her and
And what
undermines
keeps
her
her from
all the
picking
way
up
through.
the phone and calling the police? Lack of self-esteem.
Once the battering has started, you are in a vicious circle. To say that a woman should just rescue herself is not understanding any political situation that's going on.
How are
It's
you
not
going
an
to rescue
individual
her
problem.
then? How are you going to rescue her?
Well, one of the things we have to do is actually explain to women it's not an individual problem, it's a problem of women. And the problem of sexologists and therapists and doctors is that they refuse to see a political problem. They refuse to see that something is happening to women as a class. They do, as you have just done, look at it as an individual problem. So the woman blames herself. She sees it as her own difficulty.
See, I think you're blaming someone else.
Well, I'm blaming the men.
Then they
actually.
will reach out.
Terry,
That's all
let's
I'm
get
doing.
another woman's perspective on it.
What I argue in Anticlimax is that sexual desire is not just some kind of natural thing. It is something which is constructed by the society. And for women, it is generally eroticized subordination. Because women are not born into power, so they don't have power to eroticize in the way that men do. Women are not born into equality, so they don't have equality to eroticize.
Yes.
What women
But
learn
what if
to
your
eroticize
basic premise
is
is
subordination.
wrong? You see, I mean, I look at the human body. If sex were not enjoyable, why would God have created it, and why would it be there, and why would we
When
reproduce?
you show as much concern as you obviously do to the way things are constructed in the mind, I'm astonished that you think it's actually something that is simply physical. You must know that sexual desire, like just about everything else we talk about, is absolutely constructed psychologically
But
and in the head.
was that we construct it. You think we construct the pleasure?
I would say that the basic premise is that we have the physiological ability to enjoy certain forms of sensation. But the way that we understand them in our heads, and a lot of what we think of as simply physical pleasure, is actually psychologically constructed, and it is actually constructed under male supremacy around eroticizing women's subordination. In fact, women's powerlessness is eroticized for men. They find it
But
attractive.
surely power
Why do you
has to
limit
do
it
with
to
money,
sex?
not with sex. I mean, men are powerful because they normally or usually have more money. And it was only when women got the opportunity of being better educated and, you know, working for themselves that they have money. That is equality. It's nothing to do with sex. Sex is a natural thing,
I think
particularly
sex
between a man and a
is
woman.
pretty important in as much as the whole social relations of the society in which we live are based upon the act of sexual intercourse.
Or are
Now,
they based on
remove
money?
the importance
That's again
of
your
that
statement.
act.
It's not when you interview many married people who have been married for 30 years, they don't put that at the top of the
I
list.
agree, but the reason that they are in that structure, the reason heterosexuality exists as it does, as the cement of this society, is because the whole society, which is based on the relations between men and women, is organized around that act. Now, if we remove that, then people can relate to each other in all kinds of different ways.
Sheila, you yourself were heterosexual, and you chose to become lesbian. You chose. Now, a lot of people...
I might disagree with that too.
Okay, well, this is what...
I expect you would.
This is what
that
Sheila
you
says.
would have a choice. Right?
That's what Sheila says. But a lot of the time when we're on radio particularly, and you're talking to gay people of either sex, they stress that they didn't have a choice. They were born that way. It is not an aberration that they are seduced into socially. It is the way they are. It's something to do with their internal makeup. It was there in the womb, and that's the way it is. They don't have a choice. A lot of them would say, we'd love to have a choice, but we don't. We are this way. And especially when society is so disapproving, in many societies
That's
of...
one of the reasons that they say that, is that in a society which is totally disapproving, you have to say, I didn't choose it, actually I cannot help it. That's one of the things you have to say.
Did you enjoy your heterosexual relationship before you chose to be otherwise?
When I was heterosexual, in fact, I would say when I was a teenager, I had no particular sexuality in any direction. I didn't recognize myself particularly as sexual. And in fact, I visited psychiatrists in order to become actively heterosexual. which is a fairly normal thing. I mean, an awful lot of people do. And then I suppose I thought I was perfectly heterosexual. I thought I was doing really well during the sexual revolution from 1968 to 1973. Now, looking back on it, I would understand that the sexual response I was having then was, as it is for the majority of women, about eroticized subordination and was not something that was strengthening to me.
Terry?
It's not. The majority of women do not see it as submission or dominance. They really, I mean, a lot of women actually enjoy sex with men. And I think that heterosexuals have become, thank God, much more tolerant and understanding of lesbians and male homosexuals. But I don't think you're very tolerant of us.
Right.
I think what is interesting is that, I mean, I see it as a loyalty oath. When you question heterosexuality and you question sexual intercourse and its dominance, and its total dominance, and it's compulsory in this society, there's extremely little choice about whether to engage in that activity for any women. When you question it, women very often do, and I'm afraid I think you are doing it, Terry, now, is doing a loyalty oath. If you don't express your loyalty to the act of sexual intercourse, you are a heretic, you are totally disloyal and a rebel in this society. And actually, you get punished.
I'm a
you
perfectly
do
normal,
get punished.
full-blooded woman.
If you
like
talk to women when men aren't around, they don't have to take the loyalty oath. A lot of women will say they are not so keen.
Another fact is we have 5 children. One is gay. He didn't have a choice. I know that. And I know that the genes in the family all come from the same parents. And I think you have a wonderful sentence that stops everything. I don't accept that. Well, we can answer you. I don't accept that. And then there's no communication, there's no change, there's no openness.
What you're doing again is failing to recognize the politics. And I'm not surprised you
fault,
don't.
right.
I mean, as a therapist and a healer, it's likely you'll take an individualistic line and you won't see the politics.
Right.
But what I'm trying to argue in the book is that heterosexuality is a political construction in order to keep women subordinate, in order to keep them controlled. I know you don't. I know you don't.
Well, that's your answer to what I say.
In order to get women's labor, women's sexual labor, reproductive labor, domestic labor, and all of those things, heterosexuality has to continue because there's no way of getting women's free labor unless it does, and there's no way of controlling it unless it does.
How do you have babies if you don't have sex?
So what we have is a society in which there's tremendous propaganda for heterosexuality, and in fact in which homosexuality is never mentioned, or in Britain we've just had a law forbidding the mentioning of it in certain contexts, because heterosexuality is actually fragile. If it was so natural, nobody would worry about it. So heterosexuality is a political construction. You cannot choose to be heterosexual in a society which actually treats you like dirt and tries to put you away if you're not. That isn't a choice.
No, I
you can't
would agree
talk
with
about choice
the
in that
unhealthiness of dealing with the gay population.
But what about the continuing of the human race? I mean, how do we reproduce if we don't...
Well, there are ways to reproduce without having heterosexual lifetime relationships. I mean, one of the things that I argue in the book is that sexual intercourse is something that you can engage in if you like for reproduction. There are other methods, but sexual intercourse seems a reasonable one. But that would only require 3 or 4 acts of sexual intercourse in a lifetime.
That's treating a man like a sperm bank, and then we're exploiting them if we just
sexual intercourse for women. Sexual intercourse for women is an act which requires that a woman become medicalized in this society, that she have complicated methods of contraception, that she has abilities for abortion, that various diseases are transferred through this activity. It's also symbolically the activity which is about male dominance and female submission.
Sheila.
It's not necessary to a woman's pleasure. What I would argue is that in any society in which there is equality for women, sexual intercourse would play a very tiny part, and I suspect only for reproduction.
Sheila, a couple of things. There are people out there, family show like this, husbands and wives watching, happy together, 35 years together, holding hands maybe, looking at the set, and they're saying, this woman basically is raging she wasn't born a man, because we're happy together as man and woman.
They might also stop holding hands.
No, but they might just say that. Right? What do you say? What do you say to them?
I have no idea what that would mean. It's such an obviously simple anti-feminist statement, but feminists are not people who want to be men.
I'm just saying there are people out there holding hands, and they're man and woman, and they're saying we're perfectly happy. It would be bizarre to us, anti-nature, anti-natural, anti-everything we have been, to go the road that you're suggesting. And perhaps they will suspect that you'd love to have been born a man to get all the advantages that men have.
I can't see what being born a man has anything to do with it. What I'm trying to do is work towards creating a world in which women are not raped, battered, oppressed, afraid to go out on the street, earning less money, and all the things that constitute the oppression of women. It's not about being a man, it's about ending the oppression of women.
What do we have to do as men, Bernie and Breen and myself and the rest of them, to rehabilitate ourselves? What changes do we need to
well,
by your thesis?
Well, what I argue at the end of the book is that we actually have to work hard at trying to eroticize equality. And even though you might think that would be easy, I think it's enormously difficult, because the whole way sex is constructed in this society is around power difference.
Right.
And eroticizing equality is going to be a hard job, and I think we should all be doing that.